My name is Paul Martin. I am the founder and advisor for College Money Method. I work with many schools to provide workshops for students and their families to be able to navigate the financial aid process and to make college affordable. And today I'm doing a mini workshop for counselors that may want to learn more about how they may qualify for public service loan forgiveness and the temporary waiver that's currently available, which is really important because we have a deadline of Halloween this year, so October 31st, in order to apply for that temporary waiver and to get many benefits of the public service loan forgiveness. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and allow you guys to walk through some of those key components. So as you can see, if you're not familiar with public service loan forgiveness, it is a program that is focused on federal loans. So this isn't for any student loans. This is specific for loans borrowed from the federal government for your education that would allow for you, once you make 120 qualifying payments, which is essentially 10 years of loan payments, traditionally on direct loans, which is a certain type of federal loan, as long as you're making those payments working for a qualified employer, you will be able to get the remaining balance of that loan forgiven at the end of those payments, as long as you're working for a qualified employer. And that forgiven amount is not taxed. So the forgiveness isn't on the full loan amount, it is on whatever's remaining to be paid for you in terms of those final what's left over at the end of 120 qualifying payments. So the basics are that you have to make the payments on time and that you have to be under a certain type of plan. Typically, you have to be on an IDR, stands for income driven repayment plan, or in the standard plan, and you have to pay the amount due at least. So you have to make the full payment due. But importantly, these payments could be non-consecutive. So that means you could have paid under a qualified employer for a certain number of months, left that job, taken time off, or gone to a for-profit company and come back and started working for another qualified employer. And in that process, those months all count. The months where you're working for a qualified employer will count. Now, there are certain types of payments, as you can see, that don't count if the payments are more than 15 days late, made for less than the due amount, and if you're under a certain payment plan. Now, the most important element of qualifying for public service loan forgiveness is being with an eligible employer. So it's not the type of work that you do, it's actually who you work for that would qualify you. If you're working for the right type of employer, would qualify payments you made to your to your student loans to be forgiven. Again, these federal loans. So you have to be full-time, which is considered 30 hours a week or the equivalent. You could be working for the government, any local, state, or federal government. All 501c3 nonprofits qualify, and there are some limited exceptions for other employers. What won't count is if you are working for a qualified employer, but you're only working part-time. So that won't qualify if you're only part-time and you're making payments. If you're volunteering for one of these groups, if you work for a for-profit entity, as you would imagine, or for labor unions. So those are some of the basics of how PSLF works. Really importantly is if you're currently in payment pause because of COVID, which most folks are if they're in at least if they have direct federal loans, all of those months in which you're in payment pause today, even though you haven't been making payments, if during those months you are working for a qualified employer or eligible employer, you in fact will get credit toward PSLF for those months. So it's a really kind of big bonus for folks because they haven't been making active payments because they've been in COVID pause or forbearance, but in fact, they will be qualified all those months in which the payment was in forbearance will count toward PSLF. So what is the difference between PSLF and the limited waiver? And there are some really key differences. So basically, there are other loan types that will now qualify for loan forgiveness. So traditionally, it has only been direct loans, and those loans are usually dispersed after like 2010, 2012. But now if you are paying or have been paying on FEL loans or on Perkins loans, those loans are eligible for forgiveness, and the payments you've previously made on those loans would be eligible to count for public service loan forgiveness. Also, it doesn't matter if you were on one of those type of repayment plans we discussed, like income-driven repayment. If you were just paying your loans on any kind of plan, any payments you made, as long as you're with a qualified employer, will now count. You can get credit for that. This is what this limited waiver is about. This is an exemption period where you can jump on PSLF and be able to get all of this counted and be caught up in a sense, potentially, or certainly get a lot more credit and be a lot closer to forgiveness. And as I mentioned, it doesn't matter the loan type, except for Parent Plus loans. If you had a direct loan, a FEL loan, or Perkins loans, those are all now eligible. Now, what's still and the most important qualifying event is that you are working for an eligible employer, and that you're doing that full time while you've made these payments in the past, or while we've been in COVID forbearance for now. So there's a key thing that has to happen if you happen to have one of these loans that's not a direct loan, which is called the FEL or Perkins loans, is that you do have to consolidate those loans into a direct loan before October 31st. And you don't have to have the consolidation finished, but you have to have your application for consolidation done by midnight of October 31st. If you don't have that consolidation application in, then those loans cannot be included in the loan forgiveness. It would be only any loans that were considered direct loans. So again, here are the different types of borrower groups. So if you borrow direct loans, that type of loan, that's called a direct loan. Really, the key component is for you to file your PSLF form for each eligible employer, and I'm going to walk through what that means before, and have that form signed by those employers by October 31st, so that you can get credit for all of those payments that you have made while you were working for those employers either currently or in the past, and be caught up. Again, if you previously consolidated into direct loan, then you want to file that PSLF form in order to get credit for those months. And if you still have these other types of loans, which you may have today, which are the FEL and Perkins loans, you do need to consolidate those loans and apply for a consolidation before October 31st. So again, the key steps are to confirm whether an employer is qualified, that's your current employer or previous employers. Consolidate loans if it's necessary. That would be only the case if you don't have a direct loan, or if you have, in other words, if you have a FEL or a Perkins loan, and you could submit your PSLF forms, and this has to be done by October 31st. So I wanted to show you, you might be quite wondering, how do you know what type of loan you have? So in order to go through this process, you do have to have a federal student aid ID to be able to check on studentaid.gov and go through this process, including the application process. So that might be the first step. If you have a much older loan, you may not have managed any of your loans through studentaid.gov. And in order to do that, you have to create a federal student aid ID, which is what we tell students to create when they apply for FAFSA. And once you're logged in, you can see here that if you go under your name to dashboard, or more specifically my aid, you'll be able to see all the loans that you currently have that have been barred from the federal government. So this is an extensive database. These are loans when I was in college, actually. There were 6 loans that I borrowed while I was in college in the 90s. And so all the loans that you borrowed from the federal government will be here. So you can see the loan types, subsidized and unsubsidized types, and you can see what I was telling you about. They will say whether you have a direct loan. This is FELP, which is a FEL loan, as well. There could be a Perkins loan designation. So if some of these loans are you still have principal, meaning you still owe money on those loans, and they're not a direct loan type, those would have to be consolidated in order for you to then move forward to get full forgiveness on those loans. So now a couple of things to know about consolidation if you need to go down this path. is that your monthly payment may go up or down depending on what that consolidation looks like. So if it does go down, you may have a longer payment term before you get that remainder forgiven. If you have any unpaid interest on that loan, the principal balance will go up because that unpaid interest will be added to your loan balance. Your new consolidated loan will have a new interest rate. It'll be a combined interest rate. And importantly, you don't have to consolidate all your federal loans, right? So if you have a FEL loan or Perkins loan that you're 2 months away from paying off, you may not want to consolidate that loan because by the time you're eligible for forgiveness, you would have paid that loan anyway. Remember, you're only forgiven any remaining balance on the loans that you may have. So specifically, the steps for applying for PSLF, or particularly the waiver, which I wanted to talk to you about today, is that you have to submit one form and that form you would have to get all your previous employers to verify your employment, that they're an eligible employer, in order for you to get all those back payments credited to you that you may have made while you work for that employer. So I'll give you some examples I have a couple of employer examples here that just show you how this might work. So let's say you're in the case that you work for a university from September 2009 to July 13th, July 2013. That's 47 months if that university is, I apologize for the misspelling, but if that university is a qualified university, in other words, they're a not-for-profit university, you would be able to get credit for 47 months. And then currently, if you're working for a school and you started working for that school in 2018, let's say from 2013 to 2018, you worked for a private employer, you came back, well, you would get credit, even if you're not in PSLF today, you can get credit for all the months of payment while you work for that school. And remember, you get credit for these months of COVID forbearance. So even though you might not be paying your loans back right now, all of those months since the payment pause, which started in March 2020, will count toward your payment count. So you can see here in this case, you could have 47 months you're going to get credit for, and 51 months you get credit for from school. So you've caught up, and now you're at 98 payments credited toward your PSLF and loan forgiveness, and you will be required to make a total of 120 payments, which means you only have 22 payments left, or a year and 10 months left to pay the loan. And then once you've made those payments, again, any remaining amount will be forgiven. So this is a great opportunity, even if you don't think you've made the 120 payments, to get as much credit as you can toward those payment counts. Another example could be somebody who may have already made all their payments. So they could be working at the same school since August 2011. And if we count the number of months from August 2011 till today, that's 135 months. As soon as you submit this waiver form and make sure that you have a direct loan or you've consolidated into a direct loan, there's some processing time, but you have made those 120 payments and you'll be done. So you won't have, you'll have the rest of that loan amount forgiven. Now, essentially then that means if you've continually worked for a qualified employer since September 2012, and you've made your payments on time, or you've been under COVID forbearance in this case, then you are done and you will have the remainder of your loan forgiven. So as mentioned, you do have to make sure your employer is a qualified employer. So let me make sure I do this here. It keeps logging me out. But one of the ways you can do that is you can go to the PSLF help tool. So this tool you need to use while you're logged in. And this is actually how you fill out the application. There's only 5 screens you have to fill out. One of the most times in the screen are ones where you're going to be adding your employers, and you're going to add all the possible employers that you want to sign off to show that you work for an eligible employer to get payment credit for in one application. Now, the way this application works is the federal government has a database of all employers, which they already know are eligible employers. So when you add those employers to your employment history, it will automatically fill that out in your application. And your only step will be to make sure you send that to an employer for signature for employment verification. And it needs to be, again, dated by that employer by October 31st. So if you're wondering whether your employers qualify, before you go through the application process, you see I clicked here on underneath start the application is to search for qualifying employers. And in order to do that, and in order to add employers through the database in the application, you do need to know your employer's EIN number. Now, if you're currently employed, that is going to be box B in your W-2. That's the employer Social Security identification number as an employer. And that is how the database works. You cannot search by employer name or by location. You have to have this EIN number. But Google's always our friend, well, generally speaking, and typically you can Google something like the school name or your employer name, EIN, and it will tell you what that tax ID number is. So in this case, I have a tax ID number here from a school in Atlanta. And if I use that and go into that search database, you can see here, I have to just type that number in here. Make sure I got all of it. You're not supposed to add the dash here. So without the dash, and then I'm going to just say this happens to be my current employer. And then you look at the start date. So I started working for them just this past year in January. And when I hit search, it will actually show me down here that this school, in fact, is eligible for PSLF, meaning if I'm employed by them, that there's an eligible they're an eligible employer, and any payments that I made while working for that employer will be credited toward PSLF. So that is how you can, if you're wondering about past employers, whether you're going to get credit or not, and that could be a determining factor whether you apply. If you feel like you want to get the maximum number of months, you can do that search here. But when you actually go into the application, which I'm trying to get to here, you hit simply start the application. And here you can see it gives you some steps in order to understand what you're going to need to do. You're going to need to search and add all your eligible employers here, and make sure that you're checking on the loans, that the correct loans to be forgiven here. So I'm not going to go through this wizard because I don't have loans. If I go to the next step, it's going to tell me you have no loans that qualify or that are currently owed money. But this is a similar thing where if you add an employer, you're going to use the same search functionality and go ahead and choose that employer by the EIN, say your employment period. So let's say I work for them back in 2011 to 2000, let's say 2015, just to keep it simple. I have to hit search first before I hit continue, and then I can click to add that employer and hit continue. And then it asked me what my status was. So I was full-time, average number of hours per week. And if it happens to be closed, then you might have to indicate that, because that could be an alternate path to understanding your employment history. In this case, I'm going to save employer, and you can see I can add as many employers as I need to in order to fill out my entire application. So the great thing about this is it's going to be one application that you submit, but the complexity is that you have to send this application to each employer for sign off. So I'm going to show you an example of what this will look like. So once you get to going through this process and filling out each section of what's called the help tool, in order for you to fill out the employers, to put your personal information, your current personal information there, et cetera. Here's a screenshot of what I just showed you on how to add employers. You're going to get it to a confirmation screen. It's really important you understand that, and they have put a big exclamation point here. This does not mean you're done with the application. You actually have to, you can see, download the PSLF application form. This form will be now pre-populated with all the information that you just put into the wizard. So I'm going to show you an example of this. This is what you're going to be downloading here. There's a cover page with your social security number, your current information, and then this is all pre-populated here. And then for each employer that you've put in there, it's going to generate a page for them to sign. So in this case, one of my employers was FIU. So I can, and again, all this information, which looks like a lot of data entry, if you're using that database, it's all going to be pre-populated for you, because you're going to have said, as you saw earlier, when your employment begins, ends, what status you were, etc. So you can see here, this is the section for where the employer has to sign and verify that indeed what you're claiming is true, that you were employed there from this time to this time, and that you worked full time. So that what happens now is you do have to send this to your employer and get them to sign this and get this sent back to you. And that's for as many employers as you need to verify your employment history for your PSLF waiver application. Now, what's really important, fortunately, we're on October 19th, is those signatures have to be dated by October 31st. Any employment verification that happens November 1st or later, those employers and those payments, the payments you made under that employer will not count toward that 120 payments. And this is why we want to do the waiver, because we can catch up and get credit for all these payments we have made in the past that we might not have credit for today. So again, you can have as many employers here as match as eligibility, because your payments don't have to be consecutive. So you could have worked for an eligible employer, left there, taken 2 months off, worked for someone else. As long as you made your payments during that employment time that were on time and in full. Now, even with the waiver process, they actually allow for you to count partial payments or late payments. So that's an extra bonus. And as I mentioned, I'll emphasize is that this current COVID period where you've been in forbearance, everyone's been in COVID payment pause, you're going to get credit for all those months, even though payments weren't made. So this is an important part of the process. Clearly, this, again, getting this form generated using the online system and making sure that that once you're done with this online system, which it estimates to take about a half hour, it might not even take you that long. You need to print that out and make sure you get a copy to each employer that needs to sign it, and get them to sign that form before the due date. So a couple other things to note about signatures, and this is explicit on the website, but there are only certain signature types that are eligible as legal signatures. So hand drawn on the mouse pad. You can't do that electronic signing where it pretends like it's cursive. A scanned photo of a signature is eligible, or clearly anyone who's actually physically signed the form. Once you collected all the signatures, as long as they're collected by October 31st, 2022, you can then mail that in. So it has been revised that you don't have to have it mail stamped by the 31st. The key component is that the signature date for all your qualifying employers has to be by the 31st. And as well as mentioned that if you need to consolidate your loans, because you can only get PSLF on a direct loan. Again, if you have other types of loan, whether it's FFEL or Perkins loan, this waiver period allows you to qualify past payments made while you were paying as FFEL and Perkins. But in order to get the future forgiveness on those loans, you have to consolidate them into a direct loan and before the 31st of October, or sorry, you have to have applied for consolidation before the 31st of October. So I see there's one question in the chat, and if anyone else has questions, you feel free to put them in the chat. The question is, can you fill out the public service application and regular forgiveness application as well to see which one they approve? Absolutely. So we know that there's the regular forgiveness. For some folks, it's 10,000. For some folks, it could be up to 20,000. That's the blanket forgiveness. You should absolutely fill that out and also enroll in public service loan forgiveness in order for you to get credit for all the payments you made, so that even if you can have to continue to pay on some of those loans, you've got the blanket regular forgiveness. You may have a loan balance that can be forgiven in the future once you hit 120 payments for the for public service loan forgiveness. Anyone else have questions? Yeah, this is a really unique opportunity. It is limited. The reason why you can do this is because of the COVID emergency. And so that's why there's this very hard date of the 31st. But again, it's one case where all types of loans that you may have from the federal government, payments you made in the past can now qualify, even if you haven't signed up for public service loan forgiveness. And you will know what your total payment count will be once you've gone through the process, and you could be already at the point of being fully forgiven for the balance, or clearly much closer to that point with regard to getting caught up with your payment count. Okay, if anyone has questions, my email is paul@collegemoneymethod.com. Feel free to email me. And I guess there are no other questions right now. So I think someone did ask a question. I already applied for forgiveness, but my loan has been transferred to Novella, and I forgot the name. Do I need to reapply again, please? So if you are actively in, I think you're in Mohala, which is the new servicer. If you are actively enrolled in public service loan forgiveness, you don't have to do the waiver. It's only if you had alternate loans that aren't in forgiveness that you want to pull into forgiveness. Again, the Fell or the Perkins loans, or if for some reason you had you were paying on your loan and your employers in the past that you don't have payment credits for. So, if you want to be extra safe, you could fill out the waiver just to make sure you're getting every possible payment credited toward your loan forgiveness. And, that can't hurt, but it just depends on your personal circumstance. All right. And I think we have a Q&A question. Can you please send the link to apply for the waiver? Absolutely. So you're going to need to log in to your FSA with your FSA ID to studentaid.gov. But simply, it is studentaid.gov/PSLF. I'm going to cut and paste this right now into the chat. I think everyone can see the chat, if I'm not mistaken. If you hit this link here, you're going to get to this screen, which is, it says it's a help tool, which isn't great. It's actually the application. It is the start of the application, and you could work your way through those 5 screens and get that completed, hopefully this afternoon, so you can get that printed out. You're welcome. All right, we have half an hour here, so